Number 1.
Wanda Gale Lowe, age 24, went missing from Tahoe City, California on July 26, 1968. Wanda was employed at Sunnyside Resort at 1850 West Lake Boulevard on the shore of Lake Tahoe, and she was a reliable employee who would not just take off, according to those who knew her. She had attended Pepperdine University and had traveled to Germany prior to coming to the Lake Tahoe region. She was originally from Alabama. Her car was found in the parking lot of her workplace, and she was never seen again. She never picked up her last paycheck and had not picked up her mail in about 3 weeks. Wanda was living at a campsite at nearby Blackwood Canyon at the time of her disappearance. Shortly after her disappearance, her campsite was dismantled and her belongings stolen. A Volkswagen Bug was seen near the campsite around this time. Wanda was often listed as a possible victim of the Zodiac Killer, in part due to the proximity to Donna Lass, who some suspect is a victim of the Zodiac. However, her boyfriend, Dennis Finn, reportedly confessed to murdering Wanda's cousin while heavily intoxicated. Dennis died in 1982 and was never charged with her disappearance. It is believed that her remains may be in the Carpenter Valley area, near Turkey, California, which sits along Donner Pass.
Number 2.
Helen Van Beek, age 46, went missing sometime between March and May of 1998. She was last seen in Daytona Beach, Florida, where she lived with her boyfriend. Her daughter had come to visit from Houston, Texas, during Daytona Beach's Bike Week. Helen was a regular at Bike Week and Biketoberfest events, and frequented biker bars in Daytona Beach. She worked as a day laborer in construction at the time, and she had reportedly stated that she was upset with her boyfriend, and planned to leave him and move to North Carolina. During the time that her daughter was there visiting, they went shopping and went to biker bars. Her daughter stated that she had a strange feeling that she would never see her mother again, although I'm not sure if that was just a strange, unexplained feeling, or if it was due to her behavior or something that she said. Bike Week and her daughter's visit occurred in mid-March of 1998, and that is when she was last confirmed to be in Daytona Beach. In May of 1998, Helen's boyfriend called her daughter and told her that Helen had packed up all her belongings and left with someone in a white truck. Her daughter never heard from her again. Helen had filed for an order of protection against her boyfriend in 1997, but the request was denied because Helen did not appear at the hearing. On March 9, 1998, her boyfriend was charged with battery. It is not known whether this charge had any connection to Helen or to her disappearance. The charges appear to have been dropped. Obviously, something is not adding up here, but for the moment, let's just assume she actually did leave voluntarily with an individual in a white truck. Firstly, based on the fact that Helen's boyfriend is the one who said she left in a white truck, it would seem to suggest that he was at home when this occurred. It sounds like a rushed 5-minute thing, but if you stop to think for a minute, imagine packing up all your belongings and loading them all into a truck. It would take at least a full day, not to mention you would need to get boxes, tape, etc. It's hard to picture her just packing up everything and leaving, with no mention of where she was going or who she was going with. Secondly, the white truck didn't just appear. If she was leaving with someone in a white truck, she would have needed to contact someone with a white truck to arrange for them to pick her up. Has anyone checked the phone records for the day or two preceding when she supposedly left, to see if she had called anyone? I realize it would be a couple of phone bills to go through, because it isn't confirmed exactly when she left, but still, she would have had to be in contact with this person. Thirdly, if she did leave of her own volition, which she had apparently stated in the past that she planned to do, why would her boyfriend feel the need to call Helen's daughter to tell her Helen had left with someone else? Wouldn't he have assumed that Helen would let her daughter know herself? Lastly, remember, in 1998 cell phones were just gaining popularity, and were not as advanced as they are today. We didn't automatically store phone numbers in our phones, so we wouldn't have to write them down or remember them. We had address books, or we memorized the numbers of our family members. If she took everything with her when she went, did she not take her address book, or did he also know her daughter's number because he called her frequently? It's possible that he got the number from a phone bill too, but it just seems unusual that she would not take important numbers with her. There is some confusion as to when she went missing, exactly. It has been stated that she worked as a day laborer in construction. There are actually agencies for that. I wonder if she worked for one of those agencies, and if they could confirm when she last worked, and with whom. That would likely narrow down the date of her disappearance, and possibly give a clue of her state of mind on the last day she worked. I'd also be curious to know if there was a white truck involved with her job in the days leading up to her going missing. I hope Helen will be found soon, and I hope law enforcement will be able to get access to her phone records and work records, to maybe fill in some of the blanks of her disappearance.
Number 3.
Toni McNatt Chiapetta, age 14, went missing from Clairton, PA on November 5, 1981. She was last seen sometime between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. as she walked from her home to a pep rally at her high school. She was supposed to meet a male friend prior to going to the rally, but she never showed up. The last sighting of her was when she walked by an ice cream stand, which was directly across the street from a bar where her mother worked. She was wearing a black jacket imprinted with Clairton, and her name on the front, and jeans. It was reportedly pouring down rain that day. Tony was known as a tomboy, and was involved in church activities and enjoyed baton twirling. Although Tony had no history of running away or getting into any trouble, it was initially thought that she may have run away because she had lived with her grandparents for a couple months prior to the start of the school year, possibly due to sexual abuse. Tony's parents canvassed the neighborhood, to no avail. Due to the possible sexual abuse, as well as multiple domestic violence incidents that had occurred in the home, Tony's father, Sam Chiapetta, was viewed as a person of interest early on, in spite of his efforts to locate Tony, by launching a flyer campaign through his workplace, United Van Lines. Mr. Chiapetta was given a polygraph test, which indicated that he was being deceptive. Several years after Tony's disappearance, her mother appeared at the police station, and stated that she had come to believe that her husband may have been involved in Tony's disappearance. She then admitted she had always had suspicions, but was afraid of Sam, and therefore concealed some information relating to her disappearance. She told police that she had arrived home that night to find the shirt that Tony had worn to school that day, soaking wet, and hanging on the laundry line. This seemed to lead many to believe that Sam Chiapetta did indeed have a part in Tony's disappearance, because it would indicate that Tony did arrive home. I have not seen any indication, however, of what Tony was wearing when she left in the evening for the rally, other than the black jacket and jeans. It's very possible that she changed her shirt after school that day, and wore a different one to the rally. Due to the fact that it had been pouring down rain that day, it could be that her shirt was wet from walking home from school, or she could have washed it. I do not see how the shirt indicates that she came home from the rally, unless it is known that she was wearing the same shirt when she left again for the rally. It doesn't state that anywhere, nor is there any indication that the jacket, jeans, and shoes she was known to be wearing to the rally were found in the home. It has also been mentioned that Sam Chiapetta replaced their wooden deck with a cement one shortly after Tony's disappearance. It was reportedly very unusual for Sam to perform any home repairs. This has understandably led to some speculation that Tony may have been harmed at home, and that her remains may be underneath the concrete. I have not seen anything to indicate that this has been checked though. I hope they will use GPR to check for anything unusual underneath the concrete. I'm not really sure what I think happened here. Her parents are both deceased, so there is no way to get any further information from them about anything they might have known. Her sisters are living, and continue to search for information on what happened to their sister that night. There was another girl who was abducted from a nearby town, and found deceased in a wooded area, 5 days before Tony's disappearance, but police did not think the two cases were related. From reading the more recent articles, written since her mother came forward, there seems to be a consensus that something happened to her at home, at the hands of her father, but as she was seen walking to the rally, and never arrived there, according to friends, it doesn't seem too likely that she made it home, unless she never left, and the person who said they saw her walking was her mother. Since her mother worked at the bar across the street from where she was seen walking, it's possible that her mother was the one who said she saw Tony walking, but it was never stated who had claimed to see her. If her mother was the one who said she saw her walking, perhaps she also recanted that, when she came forward years later, implicating Tony's father as a possible suspect. I hope that her sisters will get answers soon.
Number 4.
Henry Louis Baltimore Jr., age 21, went missing from East Lansing, MI on May 30, 1973. Henry was a student at Michigan State University at the time, and was living in an off-campus apartment with 3 roommates. By all accounts I've seen, Henry was a very talented musician, and was a drum major for the college's marching band. He was also a happy, personable guy that got along with everyone. His happiness was marred somewhat in March of 1973, 2 months before he went missing. A man named Roy L. Davis, along with another male, entered Henry's apartment while he was there alone, and robbed him at gunpoint. $110 in cash was stolen, along with several personal items. He was also reportedly pistol whipped. There have been comments which indicate that Henry knew his attackers, which would make sense, as they were apprehended shortly afterwards. His attackers are known to have come back to his apartment multiple times following the attack. On one such occasion, they threatened Henry's life and warned him not to testify against them. There is an unconfirmed statement by someone claiming to be familiar with the case, that the stolen items were returned to Henry as part of a deal that he wouldn't testify. The 2 men were also seen knocking on Baltimore's door on the day of his disappearance. Apparently, after Henry had been threatened, he did not show up in court to testify at the preliminary hearing. While it would seemingly be due to the threats and/or possible agreement that he did not appear, it's been said that one of his family members had a medical emergency that he needed to tend to on the same date as the court appearance. A bench warrant was issued for Henry, and he was consequently arrested and fined for his failure to appear. A new date was scheduled, and Henry did appear and testified. Soon after that, he vanished, leaving behind his car and all of his personal items. The arraignment hearing was scheduled for 2 days after his disappearance. It's possible that Henry fled the area because he feared for his life after testifying, but his family does not believe he would have done this without contacting anyone, and without taking his car. More likely, the men who robbed him were responsible for his disappearance. I do not know if either of them have been questioned recently. Interestingly, a longtime member of the online MP community, who posts with the username Richard, knew Henry from college. Richard has been actively pursuing missing persons cases for more than a decade, and has contributed a great deal to the cause. He also recalls Henry as having a great personality and being very talented. Recently, on a website for Parkside High School's 40-year reunion, a posting about the event brought the curious reply of "I used to be Henry Baltimore." It is most likely a hoax, but I do hope that law enforcement checks into it just to be sure. It appears the family has no idea who sent it, or if it even actually existed. Henry's parents are both deceased, but his siblings continue to search for him. I hope he can be found soon.
Number 5.
Christine Lee Baggio, 26, disappeared from Vallejo, California in 1993. She was last heard from by family on May 30th of that year. According to family, Christine was working for the Northern California Renaissance Pleasure Fair at the time, and was staying with a man named Con McClure, also affiliated with the fair. Con McClure contacted Christine's mother, saying only that she had left to go to the store and never returned. He requested that her mother pick up her belongings that were left behind. When Christine's mother arrived, there was a sewing machine, a poem book, and a box of knickknacks that belonged to Christine. There was no clothing, purse, or identification. The Renaissance Fair is an event that is held for 4 consecutive weekends each year. The Northern California one is held in the fall months, and took place in Novato, California during that time. People who work for the Renaissance Fair can be shop owners, craftspersons, performers, or concession workers, to name a few examples. It is unclear what type of work she was doing with the fair, or if she actually did work at any of the fairs, being that reports state that she went missing in May, and the fair was not until September and October. It is possible that she had planned to work at the fair, or that she actually did, but just had not spoken with her family since a while before that. While trying to find a program for the 1992 or 1993 fair to see if she was listed as part of the staff, I came across this 1998 article. It tells of an unnamed woman who was working as a performer at the 1993 fair, when she had become the victim of a stalker. The stalker had persisted over the years, causing her to fear for her life. He apparently carried a concealed pistol and made multiple threats. Initially, I thought this could have been Christine. Further research indicated that it was a different woman, but it still doesn't completely rule out the possibility that Christine could have come into contact with this man also. Christine's family does not believe she would have gone this long without contact. I did come across this unidentified woman, with an age range of 24 to 35, who was found off a freeway exit in Winters, which is in Solano County, same as Vallejo. There is no DNA sample currently on this unidentified woman, and there is not much identifying information available for her. The race and weight of the woman were unable to be determined. She was found on January 3, 1994, and was believed to have been deceased for approximately 3 months. Hoping for some 1990s Renaissance Fair people to come across this, and maybe it will lead to someone who remembers Christine. There is very little information as to what may have happened to her, and her family is searching for answers.